Zarathiel pressed her 6 wings close against her back as she walked through the employment district of New Geneva Station. The metallic corridors echoed with the sound of her bare feet against the cold floor. Her golden feathers, once radiant and proud, now appeared dull and frayed at the edges. Dark circles shadowed her ancient eyes, and her usually perfect posture sagged with exhaustion. The holographic display outside Quantum Industries flickered with the same message she had seen dozens of times before. Position filled. Thank you for your interest. She stared at the words, feeling her heart sink deeper into her chest. This had been her 7th interview this week, and like all the others, it had ended the same way. "Ma'am, you need to move along," a security guard said, approaching her with obvious discomfort. His eyes darted nervously between her wings and the small bundle she carried in her arms. Zarathiel looked down at her sleeping daughter, Lyra. The infant Seraphim was barely 3 months old, her tiny wings no bigger than butterfly wings, translucent and delicate. Golden hair framed her peaceful face, and she clutched a worn fabric toy that Zarathiel had made from scraps. "Of course," Zarathiel whispered, adjusting Lyra gently. "I apologize for the disruption." She turned and walked away, her shoulders trembling slightly. Behind her, she could hear the guard speaking into his communicator. "Another one of those angel types hanging around. Yeah, they make the clients nervous." The words cut through her like a plasma blade. Angel types. As if she were some kind of decoration or curiosity rather than a skilled engineer with over 2 centuries of experience in quantum mechanics and stellar navigation. Zarathiel made her way to the public gardens, a small green space in the center of the station where different species could rest without paying for accommodations. She found an empty bench beneath a synthetic oak tree and settled down carefully, making sure Lyra remained comfortable. Around her, other job seekers sat in various states of despair. A group of Zentorian miners discussed their prospects in low, rumbling voices. A family of Silthak refugees shared a meager meal while their children played quietly nearby. But none of them looked at her directly. She had learned that her presence made others uncomfortable, even those who were struggling just as much as she was. The problem, she knew, was not her qualifications. Her academic records were impeccable. She had graduated top of her class from the Celestial Institute of Technology. She had worked on some of the most advanced starship designs in the galaxy. Her letters of recommendation praised her innovative thinking and meticulous attention to detail. The problem was what she was. Seraphim were rare in this part of the galaxy. Most civilizations knew them only through ancient legends and religious texts. They were described as warriors of light, divine messengers, beings of impossible beauty and terrible power. The reality was far more mundane. Seraphim were simply another species that had evolved on a high-gravity world with a unique atmospheric composition that gave them their distinctive appearance and limited flight capabilities. But the myths persisted. And myths, Zarathiel had learned, were often more powerful than reality. Some species viewed Seraphim with religious awe, unable to separate them from their own spiritual beliefs. Others saw them as pretentious and aloof, assuming they felt superior to everyone else. A few cultures considered them dangerous, remembering old stories of Seraphim warriors who had once conquered entire star systems. None of these perceptions had anything to do with who Zarathiel actually was. She was a mother trying to provide for her child. She was an engineer who loved solving complex problems. She was someone who had left everything familiar behind when war came to her homeworld, carrying nothing but her daughter and her skills. Lyra stirred in her arms, making soft cooing sounds. Zarathiel smiled down at her, gently stroking the baby's golden hair. "I know you're getting hungry, little star," she whispered. "Mama will figure something out." But even as she said the words, doubt gnawed at her. Her savings were nearly gone. The small room she rented in the station's cheapest residential section would need to be paid for again in 3 days. Lyra needed proper nutrition supplements designed for developing Seraphim physiology, and those were expensive and hard to find. She had tried everything. She had applied for positions far below her skill level. She had offered to work for reduced wages. She had even considered hiding her true nature somehow, though her wings made that impossible. Nothing worked. The interviews always started the same way. Potential employers would review her qualifications with obvious interest. They would ask technical questions, and she would answer them expertly. She could see the moment when they began to think she might be perfect for the position. Then they would notice Lyra. Sometimes they would ask directly if she had family obligations that might interfere with her work. Other times they would simply find excuses. "We're looking for someone with more experience in this specific area. The position requires long-distance travel. We need someone who can start immediately, and it seems like you might have other commitments." The discrimination was subtle but unmistakable. Single mothers were challenging enough for many employers to accept. A single mother from a species they didn't understand, carrying myths and legends they weren't sure how to navigate, was apparently impossible. As evening approached, the artificial lights in the garden dimmed to simulate sunset. Other species began to disperse, heading to their homes or whatever accommodations they could afford. Zarathiel remained on the bench, reluctant to return to her small room, where the walls seemed to close in around her worries. A young Terran woman approached, carrying a steaming cup of something that smelled wonderful. She was small and energetic, with short brown hair and kind eyes behind old-fashioned glasses. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice gentle. "I don't mean to intrude, but I noticed you've been here for a while." "Are you all right?" Zarathiel looked up, surprised by the genuine concern in the stranger's voice. "I am fine, thank you. Just thinking." The woman gestured to the empty space on the bench. "Mind if I sit? I'm Sarah, by the way. Sarah Chen." "Zarathiel," she replied, shifting slightly to make room. "And this is Lyra." Sarah settled beside her, careful not to crowd the baby. She held out her cup. "It's hot chocolate. Real earth chocolate, not the synthetic stuff. Would you like some? You look like you could use something warm." The kindness of the gesture nearly brought tears to Zarathiel's eyes. She accepted the cup gratefully, inhaling the rich, comforting aroma. "Thank you. That is very thoughtful." "I'm a sucker for helping people," Sarah admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "My friends say it's going to get me in trouble someday, but I can't seem to help myself." They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, sharing the hot chocolate. Lyra woke up and gazed at Sarah with the curious, fearless expression that babies seem to reserve for new faces. "She's beautiful," Sarah said softly. "How old is she?" 3 months, Zarathiel replied. "She has been very good during all of this, very patient with her mother's struggles." Sarah tilted her head. "Job hunting?" "Unsuccessfully." Zarathiel's voice carried a weight of exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness. "I have been trying for weeks now. My qualifications seem adequate on paper, but—" She gestured vaguely at herself, at her wings, at the baby in her arms. Sarah's expression hardened slightly. "Let me guess. They find excuses. You understand? I'm human," Sarah said with a bitter laugh. "Trust me. I understand what it's like when people make assumptions about you before they get to know who you really are. Though I have to admit your situation is probably more challenging than most." "The myths make everything complicated," Zarathiel agreed. "People expect me to be something I am not. Either they want me to be their personal angel, or they fear I will judge them for their sins, or they assume I think I am better than everyone else. They never just see me as me." Sarah studied her for a long moment. "What kind of work are you looking for?" "Engineering. Specifically quantum systems and stellar navigation. I have extensive experience with both civilian and military applications." "Military. Zarathiel's voice grew quiet. My homeworld was attacked. I served in the defense fleet for several years before... She looked down at Lyra. Before other priorities became more important. Sarah nodded, understanding passing between them without need for further explanation. What kind of quantum systems? Faster-than-light communication arrays, primarily, but also navigation computers, power distribution networks, environmental systems. I have worked on everything from small courier ships to dreadnought-class vessels. That's impressive. Sarah's voice carried genuine respect. You must have some incredible stories. A few, Zarathiel admitted, though most of them are not very cheerful. Sarah finished the last of the hot chocolate and stood up. I should probably head home. Early day tomorrow. She paused, then pulled out a small data pad. Can I give you my contact information? I might know someone who's looking for engineering help. Hope flickered in Zarathiel's chest, though she tried not to let it show too clearly. I would appreciate that very much. They exchanged contact details, and Sarah gathered her things. Before leaving, she turned back with a thoughtful expression. Zarathiel? For what it's worth, I think any company that passes up someone with your qualifications because of their own prejudices is making a huge mistake. After Sarah left, Zarathiel sat alone in the dimming garden, holding her daughter and thinking about the unexpected kindness she had just experienced. Humans, she had heard, were known for their unpredictability. Some called them reckless, others called them innovative, but Sarah had simply been decent. As she finally made her way back to her small room, Zarathiel allowed herself to hope, just a little, that maybe tomorrow would bring better news. 3 days passed before Zarathiel heard from Sarah again. She had almost convinced herself that the human woman's offer had been nothing more than polite kindness when her communication device chimed with an incoming message. Hi, Zarathiel. I talked to my boss about you. He's interested in meeting. Are you available today? Sarah. Zarathiel stared at the message for several long moments, hardly daring to believe it was real. Lyra was napping in the small crib that took up most of their tiny room's floor space. The rent notice lay on the table, reminding her that she had exactly 18 hours before she would be evicted. She typed back quickly, Yes, I am available. Thank you for thinking of me. Sarah's response came within minutes, along with an address and time. The location was in the commercial district, not far from where she had been job hunting without success. Zarathiel spent the next 2 hours preparing as carefully as she could. She washed her few remaining clean clothes and groomed her wings until they gleamed. She fed and changed Lyra, packing her small bag with supplies. Looking in the mirror, she practiced smiling and tried to project confidence she didn't feel. The address led her to a modest office building with a simple sign, Chen Engineering Solutions. The receptionist, a friendly Altarian with blue-tinted skin, directed her to a waiting area that felt comfortable rather than intimidating. Unlike the sterile corporate environments she had grown accustomed to, this place had personal touches. Photos of completed projects lined the walls, and there were actual plants growing in window boxes. Mrs. Zarathiel? A middle-aged human man emerged from an inner office. He was tall and lean, with graying hair and the kind of calloused hands that spoke of someone who had worked with tools as well as computers. I'm David Chen, Sarah's father. Zarathiel stood quickly, shifting Lyra to one arm so she could offer a handshake. Mr. Chen, thank you for agreeing to meet with me. David's grip was firm and brief. His eyes took in her appearance without judgment, focusing on her face rather than her wings. Sarah told me about your background. Quantum systems engineering, right? Yes, sir. Primarily communication arrays and navigation computers. Good. We can talk in my office. David's office was cluttered but organized, with technical manuals stacked alongside family photos. He gestured to a comfortable chair across from his desk and waited for her to settle before taking his own seat. "Sarah said you're having trouble finding work," he began without preamble. "Want to tell me why?" The directness caught Zarathiel off guard. Most interviewers danced around the obvious issues with euphemisms and careful language. "I believe my species makes potential employers uncomfortable," she said honestly. "There are many misconceptions about what Seraphim are like." David nodded. "What kind of misconceptions?" "Some people expect us to be religious figures. Others think we're arrogant or dangerous. A few assume we have abilities we don't possess." She paused, then added quietly, "And being a single mother with an infant makes me seem unreliable." "Are you unreliable?" "No, sir. Lyra is well-behaved, and I have extensive experience managing my responsibilities. I can work any hours needed, and I have never missed a deadline due to personal obligations." David leaned back in his chair. "Tell me about your last job." For the next hour, they discussed her technical background in detail. David asked specific, challenging questions about quantum field equations, navigation algorithms, and system integration protocols. Zarathiel found herself relaxing as they delved into familiar territory. This was the kind of conversation she had been hoping for, one focused on her actual abilities rather than her appearance. Lyra remained quiet throughout the interview, occasionally making soft sounds that David seemed to find more amusing than distracting. "I have a problem," David said finally. "I just landed a major contract to upgrade the communication systems for the Meridian Shipping Consortium. It's a 6-month project with tight deadlines and some significant technical challenges. The pay is good, but it requires someone who really knows what they're doing." Zarathiel's pulse quickened. "What kind of challenges?" "Integration issues. They're using ships from 7 different manufacturers, all with different communication protocols. The new system needs to be compatible with everything from ancient Terran cargo haulers to cutting-edge vegan scout ships. Plus, they want redundancy systems that can maintain contact even in the outer rim territories where subspace interference is a problem." "That is complex," Zarathiel admitted, "but not impossible. You would need modular relay stations with adaptive frequency shifting, probably using quantum entanglement backup channels for the most critical routes." David's eyebrows rose. "Go on." She leaned forward, her mind already working through the technical requirements. "The main challenge would be creating a universal translator protocol that can handle the timing differences between species. Vegan ships communicate almost instantaneously, while Terran systems have built-in delays for verification processes. You would need adaptive buffering systems to—" She stopped, suddenly aware that she had been talking for several minutes, while David listened with an increasingly interested expression. "Sorry," she said. "I tend to get carried away with technical problems." "Don't apologize. That's exactly the kind of thinking this project needs." David stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the busy street below. "I'm going to be honest with you, Zarathiel. I've interviewed 12 candidates for this position. You're the first one who immediately grasped the real scope of the problem. Other engineers have looked at this project? 3 Zentaurians with impressive credentials, 5 humans with good references, 2 Altarians with solid experience, and a vegan who claimed to be a quantum communications specialist." David turned back to face her. "They all focused on the hardware requirements. None of them seemed to understand that the real challenge is getting different species' communication philosophies to work together." Zarathiel felt a flutter of hope. "Different species do approach communication differently. We Seraphim prefer direct, efficient exchanges, while I have worked with humans who value verbal confirmation of every step. Vegans barely use words at all in their technical communications." "Exactly." David returned to his desk and pulled out a contract folder. The job pays 800 credits per week, plus performance bonuses if we meet the early completion targets. Medical benefits included, and I provide on-site childcare for employees who need it. Zarathiel stared at him. On-site childcare? My wife runs it. She's a retired teacher who loves having kids around. We've got 3 other employees with young children, so Lyra would have playmates. The offer was so far beyond what Zarathiel had hoped for that she felt dizzy. Mr. Chen, this is very generous, but I have to ask. Why are you willing to take a chance on me when so many others would not? David sat back down and looked at her seriously. You want the truth? Yes, sir. 2 reasons. First, you're clearly the most qualified person I've interviewed. I'd be an idiot to let prejudice cost me the best engineer for the job. He paused. Second, my daughter raised me well. She's always been good at seeing past surface differences to who people really are. If Sarah says you're worth knowing, that's good enough for me. Zarathiel felt tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. I accept your offer, Mr. Chen. You will not regret giving me this opportunity. I'm sure I won't. David slid the contract across his desk. There is one condition, though. Zarathiel's heart sank. Here it comes, she thought. The catch that would make everything impossible after all. What condition? I need you to start tomorrow. This project is already running behind schedule, and every day counts. Can you handle that? Relief flooded through her so powerfully that she almost laughed. Yes, sir. I can start tomorrow. After signing the contract and discussing the project details, David showed her around the office. Chen Engineering Solutions was smaller than the corporations where she had previously worked, but it had something those places had lacked, a sense of community. The staff consisted of 8 people from 5 different species, all working on various projects with an easy camaraderie that spoke well of David's management style. Sarah was there, working on some kind of environmental monitoring system, and she grinned widely when she saw Zarathiel. Dad hired you, Sarah said happily. I knew he would. You're perfect for this project. Your father is very kind, Zarathiel replied. As are you. I do not know how to thank you both. Just do good work, David said. That's all the thanks I need. The childcare area was in a converted conference room filled with soft furniture, educational toys, and safety equipment. Mrs. Chen, a warm woman with laugh lines around her eyes, immediately fell in love with Lyra and insisted on showing Zarathiel all the facilities. We have formula and food for different species, Mrs. Chen explained. Nap areas, play spaces, even a small medical station in case anyone gets hurt. The children love it here. That evening, Zarathiel sat in her small room, holding Lyra and looking at the signed contract on her table. For the first time in months, the future looked bright. She had work that would challenge her abilities, people who seemed to accept her as she was, and a safe place for her daughter. But as she prepared for her first day, a nagging worry crept into her mind. The project David had described was indeed complex. The timeline was tight, and the technical challenges were significant. What if she couldn't deliver? What if she failed and proved that all those other employers had been right to pass her over? She looked down at Lyra, who was playing with her tiny fabric toy, completely trusting that her mother would take care of everything. I will not fail you, little star, Zarathiel whispered, and I will not fail the people who have given us this chance. The next morning, she arrived at the office 30 minutes early, ready to begin the most important project of her career. David was already there, reviewing technical specifications with a cup of coffee in his hand. Ready to save the Meridian Shipping Consortium? He asked with a smile. Ready, Zarathiel replied, settling Lyra in the childcare area before taking her place at the engineering station David had prepared for her. As she began reviewing the project files, she realized that David had been modest about the complexity of the task ahead. The technical requirements were staggering, the integration challenges were unprecedented, and the timeline was almost impossibly tight. It was exactly the kind of problem she loved to solve. The first month of the Meridian project pushed Zarathiel harder than any challenge she had faced since the war. The shipping consortium's fleet was even more diverse than David had initially described. She found herself working with communication systems that ranged from century-old Terran designs to experimental Andromedan technology that operated on principles she had never encountered before. Each morning she arrived at the office to find new problems waiting in her inbox. A Centaurian freight captain reported that his navigation computer couldn't interface with the new communication array. A Vegan scout ship's pilot complained that the system's response time was too slow for their rapid decision-making processes. An aging Terran cargo hauler had developed mysterious signal interference that seemed to violate basic physics. "How's our miracle worker doing today?" Sarah asked one morning, finding Zarathiel hunched over 3 different displays, her wings spread wide for balance as she reached for multiple input devices simultaneously. "Questioning my sanity," Zarathiel replied without looking up. "I have been staring at these signal patterns for 6 hours, and I cannot understand why the Andromedan relay is creating harmonic resonance in the Terran backup systems." Sarah leaned over her shoulder, studying the incomprehensible data scrolling across the screens. "Maybe you need fresh eyes on this. I have had 3 other engineers review the calculations. They all agree the systems should be compatible. What about fresh non-engineer eyes?" Zarathiel finally looked up, fatigue evident in her golden eyes. "What do you mean?" "Well, you're all thinking like engineers. What if the problem isn't technical? What if it's philosophical?" "Philosophical?" Sarah pulled up a chair beside her. "Think about it. Andromedans are completely logical, right? Pure cause and effect, no emotional considerations. Terrans are paranoid. We build redundancy on top of redundancy because we always expect something to go wrong." Zarathiel blinked, her tired mind slowly processing the idea. "You are suggesting that the Andromedan system is conflicting with the Terran backup protocols because the Andromedan system sees the backups as illogical waste, and it's trying to optimize them away," Sarah finished. "Meanwhile, the Terran systems are interpreting that optimization as a potential failure and triggering more backup processes." For several seconds, Zarathiel stared at her displays with new understanding. Then she began typing rapidly, pulling up system logs she had previously ignored. "There," she breathed, pointing at a series of entries. "The Andromedan relay is sending efficiency recommendations that the Terran systems are interpreting as error warnings. They are essentially arguing with each other in machine language." Sarah grinned. "So how do we get them to stop arguing?" "We make them speak different languages." Zarathiel was already opening new programming windows. "I create a translation layer that converts Andromedan optimization suggestions into Terran confirmation protocols. The systems will think they are agreeing with each other." The solution took her 3 days to implement, but when she finally activated the modified system, the harmonic resonance disappeared completely. More importantly, the overall network efficiency improved by 12%. David found her in the break room later that week, celebrating her success with a cup of the terrible coffee that somehow tasted better when you were winning. "I heard you solved the Andromedan problem," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "With help," Zarathiel acknowledged. "Sarah had an insight that I had missed completely. That's how the best engineering works. Different perspectives finding solutions that none of us could reach alone." David paused. "Speaking of which, I have some news. The Meridian Consortium is so impressed with the progress that they want to expand the project." Zarathiel looked up from her coffee. "Expand how?" "They want us to design communication systems for their new deep space exploration fleet. 12 ships, heading out beyond the outer rim where there are no relay stations and subspace communication becomes unreliable. The magnitude of the challenge hit her immediately. Deep space communication required entirely different approaches. Without fixed relay points, ships would need to create their own network as they traveled, maintaining contact across vast distances with no infrastructure support. "That is ambitious," she said carefully. "It's also completely beyond anything my company has attempted before," David admitted. "I told them I'd need to think about it." "What would be required?" David pulled out a datapad and showed her the preliminary specifications. As Zarathiel read through them, her engineering mind began automatically analyzing the problems. Quantum entanglement communication arrays for instantaneous contact, adaptive relay drones that could be deployed to create temporary network nodes, emergency backup systems that could maintain contact even if primary ships were destroyed. "This would require at least 6 months of development," she said finally. "And the quantum entanglement arrays alone would cost—" "Money isn't the primary concern," David interrupted. "The consortium is offering enough to keep us busy for the next 2 years. The question is whether we can actually do it." Zarathiel looked at the specifications again, her mind racing through possibilities. "It would require innovations in several areas that have never been combined before. The quantum communication technology exists, but adapting it for mobile deployment while maintaining stability, that is theoretical at best." "So you think it's impossible?" She was quiet for a long moment, considering. "I think it is the kind of impossible that humans seem to specialize in making possible." David laughed. "Is that your way of saying you want to try?" "I am saying that 3 months ago I thought finding any job was impossible. Yet here I am, working on projects that challenge everything I thought I knew about engineering." She looked up at him. "If you are willing to take the risk, I would like to try." The next phase of development required expanding the team. David hired 2 additional quantum physicists, a Vegan systems analyst who specialized in deep space operations, and a young Altarian programmer who had written her doctoral thesis on adaptive network protocols. What struck Zarathiel most about the expanded team was how naturally everyone worked together. David had created an environment where species differences became advantages rather than obstacles. The vegan analyst's nonverbal communication style helped them develop more efficient data transmission protocols. The Altarians' parallel processing capabilities allowed them to test multiple design variations simultaneously. And gradually, Zarathiel realized that her own background was being valued rather than merely tolerated. Her experience with military communication systems proved invaluable when designing emergency protocols. Her Seraphim physiology, with its enhanced spatial reasoning abilities, helped her visualize complex 3-dimensional network topologies that others found difficult to conceptualize. "You know what's funny?" Sarah said one evening, finding Zarathiel working late again, while Lyra played quietly in her lap. "What?" "All those other companies that passed you up are probably kicking themselves right about now." Zarathiel looked up from her calculations. "Why?" "Because news travels fast in the engineering community. Everyone knows that Chen Engineering Solutions just landed the biggest communication systems contract in the sector, and everyone knows who's leading the technical development." "I am not leading anything," Zarathiel protested. "This is a team effort. You're the senior engineer on the project. You designed the core innovations, and your name is going to be on the patents," Sarah pointed out. "Face it, you've become famous." The idea seemed absurd to Zarathiel. She was just doing her job, solving problems the way she had always done. But over the following weeks, she began to notice changes. Other companies started reaching out to David, asking about her availability for consulting work. Engineering journals requested interviews about her quantum communication innovations. A few universities invited her to speak about her deep space network designs. "I do not understand why people are so interested," she told David during one of their weekly progress meetings. The solutions are logical extensions of existing technology. That's what makes you a good engineer, David replied. You see obvious solutions to problems that everyone else thinks are impossible. The breakthrough came in month 4, when Zarathiel realized that instead of trying to maintain a traditional network structure across deep space, they could create a system that functioned more like a living organism. Each ship would carry communication drones that could reproduce themselves using materials gathered from asteroids and space debris. The drones would form temporary networks that could adapt and reconfigure themselves as needed. It is not like any communication system that has ever been built, she explained to the assembled team. Instead of fixed infrastructure, we create infrastructure that grows and evolves. The Vegan analyst's eyes went wide with understanding. Organic networks. The communication paths change based on available resources and operational requirements. Exactly. If one section of the network is destroyed, the remaining drones automatically reconfigure to maintain connectivity. The Altarian programmer was already working through the algorithmic requirements. The complexity calculations are staggering, but theoretically possible. We would need adaptive AI systems in each drone to handle real-time network optimization. By month 6, they had built a prototype that exceeded all of the consortium's requirements. The test deployment created a stable communication network across a volume of space larger than most star systems, with redundancy levels that approached military specifications. The day of the final demonstration, Zarathiel stood before a room filled with consortium executives, Meridian shipping captains, and representatives from 3 different planetary governments. Lyra, now 9 months old and crawling everywhere, sat in Mrs. Chen's lap, playing with a toy starship. The system you see here represents a fundamental advancement in deep space communication, Zarathiel began, her voice steady despite the importance of the moment. For the first time, exploration fleets will be able to maintain instant contact with home bases regardless of distance or local conditions. She demonstrated the network's capabilities, showing how it could maintain communication across impossible distances, adapt to equipment failures, and even continue functioning if entire ships were lost. The quantum entanglement arrays provided truly instantaneous communication, while the adaptive drones created backup networks that could handle any conceivable failure scenario. When the demonstration ended, the room erupted in applause. Consortium executives immediately began discussing expanded contracts. Government representatives talked about applications for their own deep space programs. But the moment that meant the most to Zarathiel came afterward, when a grizzled Terran ship captain approached her. "Ma'am," he said, extending his hand, "I've been hauling cargo through deep space for 30 years. This system of yours is going to save lives. Maybe thousands of them." That evening, the entire Chen engineering team gathered for a celebration dinner. David raised his glass for a toast. "To Zarathiel," he said, "who proved that the best person for a job is simply the best person for the job, regardless of what they look like or where they come from." As everyone cheered, Zarathiel felt tears in her eyes. Not tears of sadness this time, but tears of gratitude and belonging. She looked around the table at people who had become more than colleagues. They had become family. Sarah, who had seen past surface differences to recognize potential. David, who had valued qualifications over prejudice. Mrs. Chen, who had cared for Lyra as if she were her own grandchild. And she thought about all the employers who had turned her away, all the opportunities she had been denied, all the assumptions that had been made about her capabilities based on her appearance or her circumstances. Their loss, she realized, had been humanity's gain. More specifically, it had been Chen Engineering's gain, and the Meridian Consortium's gain, and the gain of every deep space traveler who would benefit from safer, more reliable communication systems. Later that night, as she tucked Lyra into her crib in their new, larger apartment, Zarathiel reflected on how much her life had changed. She had stable work that challenged and fulfilled her. She had colleagues who respected her abilities. She had friends who cared about her as a person, rather than seeing her as a curiosity or a threat. Most importantly, she had hope for the future. Lyra would grow up in a world where at least some people judged others by their character and capabilities rather than by their species or circumstances. That was a gift worth more than any salary or recognition. As she settled into her own bed, Zarathiel smiled at the irony of it all. The companies that had rejected her had been looking for someone extraordinary, someone who could solve impossible problems and create innovative solutions. They had found exactly that person in their interviews with her. They just hadn't been able to see past her wings to recognize it, their loss, and her gain, and most importantly, a testament to the kind of people humans could be when they chose to see potential rather than prejudice, when they valued substance over surface, when they gave someone a chance to prove what they could accomplish. In the end, that chance was all she had ever needed.